Hi, I'm Ray from PhoneArena and you're watching our Sony Xperia Z1 video review. So Sony introduced its Xperia Z flagship in the beginning of the year, and while the smartphone had a lot going for it, it was still somewhat rough around the edges. It had fancy front and back panels made of glass, but boring rubbery sides. The screen was large and had a high resolution, but its gamma and viewing angles were lacking. The camera was 13 megapixels and featured the promising Exmor RS sensor, but the quality of the pictures was so-so. And with so much to fix, Sony hasn't even waited until next year to introduce its new top model. Instead, the company is already gearing up to release its new flagship, the Xperia Z1. It immediately becomes obvious that the Z1 is like a heavily upgraded version of its predecessor. It feels quite familiar, yet substantially improved in pretty much every area. By the looks of it, Sony has done much more than enough in order to bring those elements where the Z was lacking to the necessary premium level. However, whether this has been enough to actually leapfrog the competition is what we'll seek to answer right here and now. The Sony Xperia Z has almost the same external design as its predecessor, except it now features a nice metal frame around the sides, replacing the bland rubber material used by the Z. The phone's design looks much more complete now, and the feeling you get when you have the Xperia Z1 in your hands is that of working with a very high quality piece of machinery. The front and rear panels are still made of flat, tempered glass, reminiscent of the iPhone 4 or 4S design language. The Xperia Z1 is a beautiful phone and we commend Sony for coming up with this design. It beats Samsung's offerings in the design department and can go toe-to-toe with almost any other high-end smartphone in the industry. In-hand feel is just the way it should be. Awesome! But we do have a relatively big issue in this regard, and it has to do with the size of the Z1. With substantial bezels around the display, the Xperia Z1 takes quite a bit of room in your palm. It's definitely bulkier than its rivals like the Galaxy S4, LG G2 and HTC One. You can find a bunch of things around the sides of the Xperia Z1. Of course, we get the circular power button on the right hand side, which doesn't feel particularly bad, but isn't great either. The volume rocker that's positioned slightly below is a similar affair, as it works fine, but it's kind of small to be considered really comfortable to use. Finally, we get the tiny camera shutter key near the lower end of the right hand side, and almost surprisingly, this one is actually great. The micro SIM card slot and micro SD card slot, as well as the micro USB port, are all hidden under the protective flaps, which don't cause any trouble. You'll also be delighted to know that the Sony Xperia Z1's glass and metal shell is IP58 certified, meaning that it's water and dust resistant, something that no other Android flagship can offer at the moment. The Xperia Z1 is making full use of Sony's so-called triluminous screen technology, and the improvement in image quality since the Xperia Z is obvious. With its decent characteristics, the 5-inch 1080p display of the Z1 may not be a state-of-the-art IPS LCD panel, but it is still very good. Color balance of the Xperia Z1's display is also great, with only slightly dominant blue. As a whole, color reproduction is very accurate, with the color temperature being about 7000 kelvins, which is very close to the reference value of 6500 kelvins. Sony is still having some trouble with the gamma though, which may cause some highlights to appear a bit too bright, potentially losing some detail data. In terms of brightness, the Sony Xperia Z1 has a powerful enough output to guarantee fine outdoor viewing. It's just slightly worse than the iPhone 5, but it definitely qualifies as one of the better screens in this respect. It's much better than the Galaxy S4 screen, for example. Sadly, viewing angles are still terrible. Even at small angles, brightness starts to drop noticeably, while the whole image almost immediately gets washed out and unrecognizable. The Xperia Z1 supports the so-called X-Reality Image Enhancement technology, which attempts to boost the quality of photo and video viewed on the phone. And indeed, media that's displayed on the Z1 screen using the X-Reality engine looks very cool. The Sony Xperia Z1 comes with Android 4.2.2 Jelly Bean, which is a bit disappointing, having in mind that Android 4.3 is already available to users of Nexus devices. And on top of Android, we find Sony's custom user interface. Overall, the UI is not so in your face, but it is quite comprehensive. In our opinion, this is one of the more polished custom UIs for Android. It's certainly not the most feature-rich, but it's quite lively, making it feel fun to use. Powered by the Snapdragon 800 SoC, the Sony Xperia Z1 is a true beast. Performance will never be an issue with this handset, at least considering the current generation of software available for Android. Overall system performance is also great, with no visible hiccups or slowdowns. The GPU found in the Snapdragon 800 SoC is the Adreno 330, and it's equally powerful. Sony has installed the healthy 2 GB of RAM on the Xperia Z1, which guarantees smooth performance even when you have multiple heavy apps running in the background. The Z1 comes with a humble 16 GB of internal storage, but thankfully it also gives you the option to install a microSD card for additional storage. Sony's QWERTY keyboard is very reminiscent of the iPhone keyboard, as its main layout features only the most necessary keys. All in all, typing with the keyboard is a joy, as the letter keys are big and easy to find. The landscape layout is also great, as it takes advantage of the full screen width. The messaging app of the Xperia Z1 is very well designed, with a versatile and intuitive interface. You can easily do stuff like attach a photo or a video, for example. The default email application will do the job, though it lacks some more advanced settings like tweaking the preview text length, for example. The phone's calendar application features all the basic necessities like month, week and day views. It's a custom app, but the pinch to zoom function from the stock calendar has, thankfully, been preserved, allowing you to have a quick look at your appointments. The handset also comes with a simple calculator as well as a versatile Notes app, which isn't the most convenient Notes app ever, but makes up for it by offering a good array of options. Chrome is the browser of choice for the Sony Xperia Z1, and it tends to perform lovely on this device. As always, loading is super fast, while navigation around pages, including scrolling and zooming, is very fluid and trouble-free. LTE is supported across numerous bands, so as long as your carrier of choice offers 4G, the Z1 should provide access to 4G. If no LTE is available, the Xperia Z1 will default to HSPA+. Further completing its full set of connectivity options, the Sony Xperia Z1 is also the proud owner of support for all the latest Wi-Fi protocols, Bluetooth 4, NFC and DLNA. The beefy 20.7 megapixel camera of the Sony Xperia Z1 is one of its key features. With a new, larger sensor with a size of 1/2.3 inches, with most smartphones featuring a 1/3.2 inch sensors, the Z1's camera will have pixels of decent size despite their greater number. Meanwhile, the aperture is also quite wide at f2.0, which should help the camera achieve good results in low light conditions. The Z1 also has a wide-angle lens of 27mm that will allow you to capture more of the scene in front of you. Thankfully, the user interface of the camera app is very easy to use, especially when you're sticking with Sony's superior auto mode, which attempts to automatically pick the best settings for you depending on the scene you're trying to photograph. Still, Sony has also included a manual mode which allows you to tweak a variety of different settings on your own. There are also some other interesting camera modes in the Sony Xperia Z1. For example, there is Info Shot, which will attempt to give you useful information about object that you're photographing. And there is also Social Live, which lets you live stream up to 10 minutes of video directly to your Facebook feed. Obviously, the expectations towards this camera will be quite high, and we are happy to say that it doesn't disappoint. Images tend to have very realistic, vivid and lively colors. At the same time, the handset doesn't oversaturate or overwarm them to artificially make them look prettier. Exposure is also great most of the time, The dynamic range is good enough to let you take immersive photographs that feature both darker and lighter areas, and it will all look natural and appealing. The only drawback we can find is that some very bright areas sometimes come out overexposed, but this doesn't happen very often. Details are superb with the Z1's photos, even when compared to some of the best phone cameras out there, such as the G2. Unfortunately, such superlatives cannot be said about the Z1's night photos. The handset often messes up the exposure, while colors are also somewhat off. On the other hand, we simply love the images that the Xperia Z1 takes indoors. The photos have a great sense of depth and detail with very realistic and pleasing colors. Thankfully, the LED flash also does a very good job, allowing you to illuminate a small scene. When it comes to video recording though, this surely isn't the best camera we've seen. Mostly smooth in nature, the 1080p video lacks fine details and fails to impress us. Its quality is okay, but it's nothing earth-shattering. The Sony Xperia Z1 is a great phone to watch video on. The display looks good and is big enough so you can even watch full-length movies on it, if need be. The Walkman music player is quite cool and simplistic. It sports some interesting features like Clear Audio Plus, which aims to give some more clarity to the sound, though it's basically a specific EQ preset. Sadly, the loudspeaker of the Z1 isn't very powerful, and on top of that, its quality is really low. It's totally lacking any low frequencies, resulting in a high-pitched, harsh and unpleasant sounding. The supplied earphones, which are the MH750 model, are capable of reproducing a great sound. They aren't the most comfortable earphones you can find on the market, but if you can live with that, you'll be enjoying some sweet tunes coming out of them. Although not really amazing, the Xperia Z1 does a good job when it comes to sound quality during calls. Loudness is just enough, while voices tend to sound clear enough to be easy to comprehend. Naturally, there is a second microphone on the Z1, which is used for noise cancellation. Based on the data provided by Sony, the Xperia Z1 should be a champ in terms of battery life. The beefy 3000 mAh battery of the phone is said to provide about 15 hours of 3G talk time and a good 35 days of 3G standby time. With the Xperia Z1, Sony has finally become truly competitive. The Japanese company has been experiencing great difficulties during the last few years, but after a relatively lengthy transition, it has finally caught up with the big players of the wireless industry. Design-wise, the Xperia Z1 is a great device. It's definitely a looker, more eye-catchy than most other Android models, and you can easily tell that it's a high-end product too, thanks to its solid glass and metal casing. The downside to its exterior is that it's quite bulky when compared to most Android phones with 5-inch displays out there. Under the hood, the Z1 doesn't lag behind in any respect. With a powerful Snapdragon 800 chipset and 2 GB of RAM, the Z1 stands right next to the best Android flagships of the second half of the year. And the pleasant surprise in this whole package is the G-Lens camera. Ultimately, it managed to convince us that Sony has indeed created a winner with the Xperia Z1. The camera easily outperforms any other Android smartphone out there as far as picture taking goes. Sadly, the video isn't anything spectacular, but at least it's not too bad. With the Z1, Sony has not only caught up with the competition. It's safe to say that it has even managed to leapfrog it in some areas. We can say that the Xperia Z1 is the best Android smartphone out there right now because it doesn't really outshine all the other handsets in each and every area. But it's definitely a wonderful and well-balanced product that will certainly make competing companies such as Samsung, HTC and LG want to do even better with their next flagships. Thank you for watching our Xperia Z video review. If you'd like to learn even more about this amazing smartphone, visit us at PhoneArena.com.